The only thing lacking in this great enterprise, for it to have been fully successful, would have been for the emperor to have left Elba 2 weeks later. His landing would no longer have found the sovereigns gathered in Vienna, and the declarations of March 23rd to 25th would not have been made. Many events then supporting his determination to return to France would have been affected. Unfortunately, Monsieur Colonna d'Istria arrived from Naples, bringing with him the king's message, announcing the closing of the Congress and the departure of Emperor Alexander IV, St. Petersburg. Had the emperor left Elba only on receipt of the message he was expecting from Vienna, which Cipriani was bringing in person and which arrived in Portofrejo on the 27th, the emperor would have delayed his departure for a few days. Unfortunately, the emperor had left the island on the 26th. Cipriani, saddened not to find the emperor and delayed in reaching France, only caught up with us in Paris. Part 3, The 100 Days. My position at the Tuileries. The kindness and trust shown me by the emperor turned my service into my fortune and glory. However, after His Majesty returned to the Tuileries, I was less frequently near him than in Elba. I was generally present only when he awoke and when he went to bed, but I continued for a few days to sleep across his doorway, as I had during the trip. Then I took possession of my apartment. If the emperor had orders to give me, it was when he got up. I would report back to him when he retired to his quarters, usually at 10 p.m. I benefited from all the prerogatives of my position: a table for four, a carriage with a coachman at my disposal who came in the morning for instructions, and access to the 4 great theatrical shows sent to me by the Chamberlain, Count de Montesquieu. He was kind enough to inform me that on the remuneration list he put me down for 6,000 francs salary and 2,000 francs for clothes, which is what my predecessor received, and that His Majesty had increased the first figure to 8,000 francs, while leaving the second one standing. I spent my time visiting friends, observing the mood of the public. In the evening, the emperor generally asked me what I had done during the day. It was more out of curiosity than because of any special importance he attached to it. But that, as it may, during the first few days I spoke only of happiness and enthusiasm, which seemed to move him a great deal. If some important revelations reached me through my friends, just as devoted as I was to the emperor and his glory, I would submit these to His Majesty. As I have already stated, the evening of March 20th was given over to joy and to Queen Hortense in mourning for Empress Josephine. The princess had come to the Tuileries to greet the emperor. His Majesty had learned on Elba of the steps taken with Louis XVIII so that she could keep her property and receive the title of Duchess of Saint-Leu. When they were alone in his study, he could not help saying a few words that chagrined this princess, who nevertheless remained attached to the emperor. He deemed that people had forgotten rather quickly what was owed to his memory. After this first moment, he assured her of all his affection and went into the drawing room to receive his friend's congratulations. It can be understood that such moments had to be brief, as the emperor was impatient to devote himself to the salvation of the nation and the care of government. He remained alone in the drawing room with the Arch-Chancellor and the Duke of Bassano, two of his former ministers, from whom he confidently expected to receive accurate information on the state of things in France. His Majesty had indeed called a large quantity of individual observations on Elba, but they could lack in accuracy and particularly in uniformity. He said he would never have signed the Treaty of Paris, but as it had been signed, he would respect it and would inform Vienna of this. He was uncertain if the powers would be satisfied with that, no matter how sincere the commitment he was making. Doubtless their best interests would advise them to uphold that treaty, and he advised the Austrian emperor that nothing would be changed in the current state of Italy. This conversation was reported to me by one of 2 people present on my return from St. Helena. He said to me, "The emperor talked to us about the nature and shape of the government he wished to restore. He asked for their opinion. The 2 men outlined for him the course of the king's government and the errors into which it had been led by Monsieur de Blacas, and the exile spirit on one hand, and on the other hand, that the carelessness and lack of experience of the ministry had neither the ability nor the power to prevent. After hearing the opinions of the Duke of Bassano-Moret and the Prince Arch-Chancellor, whom he called a man of sound judgment, the emperor said to them, 'One does not recommence a political career such as mine twice. It is in my best interest to live quietly and use the remainder of my days repairing the evils brought on France by 20 years of war ending in invasion. The misfortunes of our motherland have robbed me of my retirement. The certainty that I would be disturbed in my possession of the island of Elba made me hasten matters. I came to France without any agreement with the powers, but strengthened by the divisions existing between them. What position will Vienna take? We will soon hear of it. When the powers learn of the unanimous fashion in which I was welcomed back to France, that the Bourbons could offer no resistance, and that no one, or nearly no one, took up arms to ensure their retreat to the limits of the kingdom, they will think it over before responding, and if they act in haste, they may regret it. Let us not forget that the sovereigns in Congress are not my only enemies. The European oligarchies fear me, and they have enough representatives in Vienna. Castlereagh and Wellington will stir them up against me, and they will come to a decision to make war, so we must prepare for this. His Majesty took both these ministers in with him, and after leaving the table, addressed the matter of organizing a ministry. The Prince Arch-Chancellor accepted the Justice portfolio, which he had held during the Directory. The Duke of Gaeta, Godin, Count Moulin, and Duke de Crace resumed respectively those of Finance, the Treasury, and the Navy. The war portfolio was given to the Prince of Eckmühl, Davout, whose patriotism and attachment to the Emperor, untiring zeal, and strict honesty were well known in the army. The Duke of Bassano, Murat, again became minister, Secretary of State. The position of Foreign Relations Minister remained vacant. A few days later, it was given to the Duke of Vincenza, Caulaincourt, who only accepted it to give the Emperor further proof of his devotion. Count Carnot received the interior portfolio, being proposed as the most able to reconcile the old patriotic party within the government. The Emperor knew his talents and his strength of character and remembered his noble request to serve against the enemy in 1813 and the brilliant fashion in which he had defended Antwerp. He only regretted that he had been circumvented by a few schemers. The Emperor was also being asked to appoint the Duke of Otranto, Fouché, Minister of Police. He knew this minister's taste for intrigue and his desire to get mixed up in everything, ready to jump at every chance, always sticking his foot into everyone else's shoes, said the Emperor. The Emperor showed a real aversion to using this minister, but the Duke of Bassano, Murat, the Arch-Chancellor, Counts de la Valette and Real, and even the Duke of Rovigo, Savary, agreed for various reasons to praise his behavior in 1814. For some, it was an additional guarantee for Carnot's party. For others, it was because he had consistently opposed Louis XVIII's government. He had done this, it was said, without hesitation and without ulterior motives for the Emperor's return. In the opinion of these gentlemen, the Duke of Otranto had jeopardized his own safety. They won out over the Emperor's visible reluctance, and he was put in charge of the police. It was only later the Emperor learned that this minister, hearing of his landing in France and arrival in Lyon, had hurried to orchestrate the uprising of the troops under the command of Count d'Erlon, Lefebvre, Dessunet, and the brothers Lalemant, so as to be worthy of him and return to favor. That same evening, the Emperor deliberated whether he should start hostilities by marching on Brussels, surprising the coalition as he had surprised France, and taking advantage of the animosity of that country's inhabitants towards the British to drive them out of Belgium and conquer the banks of the Rhine before the Allies were in a position to oppose this. Some consideration stopped him. His Majesty put off 2 months later what he wanted to do immediately. The Emperor returned to his quarters only between midnight and 1 a.m. and called for me. Messieurs Seneschal Pellard and Hubert, his former valet, the last two had accompanied him to Elba, came in with me. His Majesty greeted them with kindness, wishing to know about public opinion in Paris. He asked them various questions while undressing and then dismissed them, inviting them to let him know their needs. He kept Monsieur Hubert to complete his personal staff, while the other two received posts as concierges to chateaux, which they had asked for and which were vacant at the time. I waited for them to leave before submitting to His Majesty a petition by Roustan, his Mameluke, that had been given me by his father-in-law, Duville. formerly a chamber usher for the King of Rome. No matter what I said to him regarding the inappropriateness of a request that was going to remind the emperor of his son-in-law's behavior at Fontainebleau, he would not concede and insisted so much that it be presented, saying that Rustam was counting on my not refusing him that favor, that I agreed to do it. When I presented the petition to the emperor, telling him from whom it came and the request that had been made of me to present it, he answered, "He's a coward, throw it in the fire," and never mention him again. Constant had a better understanding of the enormity of his error and too much good sense to attempt such a thing. I told the emperor how surprised I had been on my arrival to find all the personnel at their posts, even the gala staff in the drawing room, and that for my part, arriving from Elba, I had wondered if His Majesty wasn't just returning from a trip in France, as so little appeared to be changed. Each had returned in uniform and resumed his duties as if they were a personal right. A few had remained in the service of the king, a small number. They merely changed uniforms. One of these had remained as an office usher, and the emperor said to him, "Well, Denis, you remained in the service of the king?" "Yes, sire, but in order to better serve your majesty." That reply displeased the emperor, and after the 100 days caused trouble for its author. It would be difficult to express the sensations felt by the various persons I encountered. It seemed to everyone that the emperor's reign had not been interrupted at all, and satisfaction appeared on all faces. In talking to all with affectionate kindness, the emperor was recapturing the influence he knew how to exert on all who approached him. During the night of the 20th, the Elban Grenadiers and the Corsican battalion arrived. On the morning of the 21st, those who were in the habit of being received by the emperor were present when he arose. The first to enter was the Grand Marshal. The emperor, catching sight of him, said, "Well, Bertrand, did you find your bed as comfortable at the Tuileries as in Elba?" "It is at least the best I have found since we left there." After a few moments, the Grand Marshal told him that Monsieur Fontaine was there. He had him come in, and as he shaved, asked him various questions, to which the skillful architect replied. Taking advantage of a lull in the conversation, he told him all that he found prestigious in his march from Caen to Paris, and that in his opinion, that last feat surpassed all others. The emperor said, "You think so? Well, I have no other merit than having accurately judged the state of affairs in France. As for my secret of marching with the masses, had I wanted to drag 2 million men along with me, I could have brought them right up to Paris walls. Public opinion was the sole conspirator in my venture. 2 men helped me immensely along the way. Labedoyer's great enthusiasm in Grenoble and Brayet's in Lyon. But at times, such is the fate of man that, had my decision to leave Elba not been crowned with success, my venture would have been considered that of a madman." Monsieur Fontaine spoke to the emperor of the statue of Henri IV on the Pont Neuf terrace, saying that all of Paris had contributed by subscription to the erection of that monument. The emperor replied that it was in a fine location, and nothing more. He talked about the work ordered by the king's household and said, in speaking of the members of that family, that beside Louis XVIII, the only man of means was the Duke of Orleans. When Monsieur Fontaine had left, I advised the emperor that his doctor, Monsieur Ferraud, and Monsieur Ivan, his former surgeon, were there. He told me to show the first in, but would not see the second, as this man had left him unexpectedly at Fontainebleau. He never returned. Monsieur Ferraud continued to come each day while the emperor was washing and dressing, as he used to do in Elba. When leaving his room, the emperor asked him if Corvisart was in Paris. The famous doctor was not there. That same day, the emperor viewed the Paris garrison, as well as the Elban troops, all gathered in the Tuileries courtyard. He delivered a strong speech full of energy, beginning with these words: "Soldiers, I came to France with 600 men because I was counting on the love of the people and the memories of the old soldiers. I was not disappointed in my expectation. Soldiers, I thank you. The glory of what we have just done goes entirely to the people and to you. All I did was to know and appreciate you." He ended the speech in this fashion: "Soldiers, only the imperial throne can guarantee the people's rights, and above all, the foremost of our interests, that of our glory. Soldiers, we shall march to drive from our territory the princes subservient to foreigners. The nation shall not only support us with its wishes, it shall follow our lead. The French people, and I can count on you, we don't wish to meddle in foreign nations' affairs, but woe to those who meddle in ours." He then introduced to them General Cambron and the guard officers who had accompanied him in Elba, and the former guard eagles appeared in the middle of the square. He then said, "Soldiers, they bring you their eagles. Let them be your rallying point in giving them to the guard. I give them to the entire army." Treason and unfortunate circumstances had covered them with a funeral veil, but thanks to the French people and to you, they shall reappear shining in all their glory. Swear that they shall be wherever the motherland's interests call them. May traitors and those who would invade our territory never be able to withstand their gaze. We so swear, the soldiers replied with enthusiasm. They then paraded to cries of Vive l'Empereur. The Elban battalion, having arrived after covering 240 leagues in 20 days, was quartered in the Elbeuf barracks on the Carousel Square. The following day, these words were written over the door in large letters: "Lodging of the Brave." By chance, I caught sight of this inscription and mentioned it to the emperor as he was going to bed, not as something that could bring about dissension in the guard, but only as a flattering homage to that battalion. The next morning, I was surprised to hear the emperor speak of it to Count Bertrand and tell him to have the inscription removed, since all the guard could not be quartered there. It was not just to say that. He added that the Elban battalion was only a deputation of the guard. All had offered to be part of it. There were therefore nothing but drawbacks and no advantages to leaving an inscription that might bring about discord. Nighttime was chosen for its disappearance. The battalion grenadiers who manned the guard posts at the Tuileries during the night of the 20th to the 21st had been designated for such duty at Pont-sur-Yonne. On the 19th at 8 p.m., they covered 25 leagues in 24 hours and arrived at their post without having left anyone behind. All this battalion received the Legion of Honor. The emperor gave each soldier an additional pension of 300 francs, and the officers who were already legionnaires advanced one rank in the order. At the audience on Sunday, March 26th, the emperor received congratulations from the ministers of the Council of State, the Supreme Court of Appeals, the Finance Court, the Imperial Court, and other tribunals, and the ranking public servants. The speeches reflect the character of their writers and speakers. All spoke of liberty and the independence and honor of the motherland. Count de Fermont's speech in the name of the Council of State was a declaration of principles. The emperor's replies were all contained in the one he had made to the Prince Arch-Chancellor. The sentiments you have expressed are my own. All for the nation, all for France. Such is my motto. I and my family, whom this great people elevated to the throne of France and maintained there in spite of political upheavals, do not want, must not, and can never claim any other titles. Monsieur Poggi, present that same evening when the emperor was retiring, told him that in all the speeches there was an almost deliberate intent to speak of liberty and constitution, as if asking for promises to be made in this regard. The emperor replied, "The country is more eager for equality than for liberty. Their concept of liberty is poorly digested. They forget that I love it as much as and more than they do. But one must not be facing 800,000 enemies who want none of it. I am above all, and more than they are, devoted to the salvation and welfare of France. I want equality for all in the means of succeeding. That is the ruling passion of the century. We must not crush it. As to liberty, if it comes about, it will be due to circumstances, and I won't be involved." Every day since the emperor had come to the Tuileries, the population, eager to see him, gathered in droves in the garden under his windows, and never failed, whenever he showed himself, to welcome him with a cheer, and only one heard at the time of Vive l'Empereur. A few days hence, the emperor went to the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, where he was soon recognized and surrounded by a crowd that accompanied him to the Tuileries. Those in his party were separated from him and were worried by this mass of people, from which a man with bad intentions could emerge. Only cries of love were heard. During this period of the 100 days, the emperor was overwhelmed with work, and yet nothing was put aside. He had Baron Fain and his former secretaries back in his cabinet, kept Monsieur Raturé with him, and took in Monsieur Fleury de Chabouon, His Majesty did not sleep more than 3 hours at a time. He then went into his study, worked for a few hours, got into a bath that was ready as soon as requested. The water was kept continuously hot. At 6 a.m., he had his shutters open and called for his mail, opening it, sitting in front of his fireplace wrapped in his robe, and remaining that way until he was ready to wash and dress. The interesting letters were set aside to be taken up later. The others were tossed on the carpet. These he called his answered. He was also given newspapers, which he perused, noting at times those where he found good articles, inquiring who had written them. After his first round of work, he would dress. This was the time when the Grand Marshal, his doctor, the architect, and his librarian, Monsieur Barbier, would come in and receive their orders. He would then dismiss them and go into his study. At one of these morning sessions, Dr. Ferraud advised a little less work and more exercise. The emperor replied, "There you are, doctor. You think I stand around, as you do with both hands in my pockets. Where do you expect me to find time to exercise?" "But sire, the Élysée Bourbon would offer your majesty the opportunity for both work and a stroll in the gardens." "You're right, but I have no time to think about a trip. I was born and built for work, not to handle a pickaxe," he said, showing one of his hands. It was quite handsome. And he was at the moment tending to his nails with great care. "My body does not know any limit to work. My presence of mind after midnight is such that I can awaken instantly. I get up without anyone guessing from the condition of my eyes that I had just been sleeping, and my dictation has as much freshness of mind as at any given moment during the day. I have inside my head a drawer for each matter. When I am through with one, I open another, and they never get mixed up." On April 8th, when he awoke, the emperor received from the Duke of Bassano, the important news of the Duke of Angoulême's capitulation, transmitted by telegraph. His Majesty decided it would be carried out and sent the following letter to Marshal Grouchy. "Count Grouchy, the king's ordinance of March 6th and the declaration signed in Vienna on March 13th by his ministers would authorize me to treat the Duke of Angoulême just as this ordinance and declaration wanted me and my family to be treated, but consistent with the decision that led me to order that the Bourbon family be allowed to freely leave France, I intend that you give orders for the Duke of Angoulême to be taken to Sète, where he be put on board a ship. You shall see to his safety and prevent any ill treatment of him. You shall only see that the funds taken from public deposits are returned, and ask him to give back the crown jewels which are the property of the nation. You shall also make him aware of the laws of our national assemblies, which have been reconfirmed, and which apply to members of the Bourbon family who would enter French territory. You shall thank the National Guard in my name for the patriotism and zeal they have shown, and for the attachment to me that they have demonstrated during these important events. Having said this, I pray God, etc."